So maybe there's more introduction that someone else wants to do, but I just want to say that I've been impressed with Darin Molnar, who's been a member for about 2 years, and he joined just a few months before COVID, unfortunately. Darin, you're
I've been a member for probably 10 years.
Oh, really?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, my bad.
I've been under the radar.
Okay.
I've been to meetings and I usually sit in the back.
But at any rate, Darin has a really fascinating, I don't know if it's a vocation or an avocation, but he's a builder of harpsichords. And I have a feeling that that's sort of like being a luthier on steroids. But I think I'd like to turn it over to Darin and let him give you a little bit of an introduction, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Okay, Joe's telling me to introduce myself. So, yeah, I've been a member. I attend meetings here and there, and I have my own shop that I put together. So you don't see me in the shop a lot because I live up in Vancouver, and these days it's increasingly difficult to get down there. So I just work out in the garage. I started building harpsichords probably about the time I joined the guild. I had been doing guitar work, acoustic guitar work, and I've played keyboard instruments since I was a little guy. And I thought, it's time I have a harpsichord, but I think I want to build one. So what I did was I looked around. First of all, does everyone know what a harpsichord is?
I was going to ask. I want to know.
So what I get is I say, well, I enjoy working on harpsichords and building them, and it's everybody says, a harp, and it's no, not a harp. Or they look at it and they say, oh, you make pianos. It's not a piano. It's an instrument that's been around since, we have evidence back to 1397. So it's got a 624-year history. And what makes it different is the strings are plucked. They're not hammered like a piano. So initially it was adapted from string instruments that people would pluck and play with their fingers. And someone decided to put a keyboard on that and have it pluck the strings, and then the harpsichord took off, and it really reached its peak in the 17th century through the middle of the 18th century. The repertoire for it started dwindling. So with instruments, if there's no repertoire, there's no reason to have the instrument, and vice versa. And really the piano started to take off, the hammered strings. Once that started to take off, and ironically, the guy who invented the hammer action was a harpsichord maker, and he worked for the Medicis in Florence, Italy. And he came up with this great invention, and then that became the piano, and that transitioned over the years to the big monster that we have today. A harpsichord is a very light, supposed to be a very sweet instrument. I get teased a lot that Lurch from Adam's Family played a harpsichord, and it's true, he did. But instruments, it's hard to pack 600 years into just an introduction about the instrument. But in the United States, so let's see, there are different national characters of instruments. So in the historical record, we have English, which were very much like Italian, because they hired the Italian guys to come up and make instruments for them. There's Flemish, which is kind of Belgium, and some guys in Holland made them. There's French, German, and some Spanish, Iberian instruments, and they all have different characters to match the repertoire of those countries at that time. Um, I'll show you the two that I'm working on right now. One is Flemish and the other is English from a later period, from the 18th century. So I decided, gosh, I think I could build one of these. I have a decent shop. And I went out looking on the internet, and I'm going to share my screen. I found this fella wrote an ebook, and he's pretty brilliant the way he went about it. These are all HTML pages. Excuse me. So as you go through the book, if you find something that needs correction, you can just email him and he'll fix it and then send the HTML page to everyone who owns the book. And then you just copy it in and your book's updated. Ernie Miller is on the East Coast. I'm not sure where he's at. I think he's up in the Northeast. And he takes you through building every part of the thing from scratch. So I'm going to pause there. There are two ways to approach this. In Europe and America, around the post-World War II, but really the 1960s, there was a renaissance in harpsichord making. Up to that point, they had taken harpsichords, and really piano makers tried to turn them into big old pianos, and it just wasn't appropriate for them. But they would extend them out and add keys and put heavy strings on them, and these instruments are so light that the heavy strings would the amount of pull, the pounds, I don't know what it's got to be 200 pounds a square inch on the strings, wrecked a lot of the old instruments. So in the 60s, there was a renaissance where they started going back to original principles, which are making light instruments that use brass strings, lighter strings, and getting back to the way they used to make them in the 17th and 18th century. So this reflects the building of a Flemish harpsichord that was originally built in 1640. It's in the Yale Museum right now as we meet. And Ernie took a copy. The plan is widely available. You can go on the Yale Museum site and you can order the plan and they'll send it to you for, I don't know what it's like, $100, something like that. Well, he went through and he steps you through building one of these things from scratch. And the interesting thing about a harpsichord is you go from tiny, tiny parts, this size, clear up to parts that are 6 feet long and
Darren, do you still need to share your screen, or are you?
Oh, did I not share it?
No, you are sharing your screen, but do you need to?
No, I don't need to share it.
Okay. Because you're showing us little parts in your little teeny window now.
Oh, where it says stop share. Yeah, so the tiny little part, that's part of a jack that plucks the strings. And I'll show you more about that out there. So my point is, when you make one of these things, you're going from millimeters and sometimes fractions of millimeters in tolerances up to furniture-sized pieces and everywhere in between. So I'm going to run out here now and I'm going to show you some of the work in progress. But the last thing I'll say is there are two approaches. There's the Ernie Miller or just get a plan and build from a plan from scratch approach. In the 60s, during the Renaissance time, a couple of 3 or 4 companies sprang up and they sell kits. And you can buy everything pre-cut, pre-routed, pre-bent. Literally, you just glue it together. I have one that I'm building from scratch, and then I have 2 kits. One of the kits, I've decided to put the first instrument on hold and finish the kit because there's not enough room out there, as you'll see. And I just want to get that kit done. It's easy since all the parts are there, and I'll show you those parts. They're sitting on the assembly table. So I'm going to head out there now. I'm coming out, guys. So this is the shop. I'm sure it's underwhelming for most of you.
All right, Darin, we need you to change. They need to fix your mic.
Oh, all right. Hang on. It should be on. Okay. Oh, we need to change this. Stand by.
How about now? There we go.
Yeah, that's good.
This is the shop. It's Tortuga Early Instruments. I'm going to close this. I got an echo. Come on out. Come on out, dude. But I often call it two-car enterprises because really this is just a two-car garage that I've managed to pack all of this equipment and tools into. So what I have is you can't see it. I have a 41-inch lathe. It's just one of the old Craftsman lathes. I think it's got a 12-inch throw on it. Then I've got a mortising tool that I've adapted, and I'll talk more about that later. That's essentially right now in its current state, it's a jig for making harpsichord parts. I've got an assembly table that also acts as my outfeed table for my table saw. And then I've got a go-bar deck that I use for gluing up, I glued soundboards and some of the larger parts. The go bars are up in the top with some of the other wood that I've got stored up there. Underneath, I've got jigs and wood and other stuff stored under here, as well as my dust collection. I've got a CNC machine in the corner. That's a Shapeoko 3XXL. And its cut surface is, I think it's 33 by 33 inches. But I'll show you how I got more out of that. I've got and then just the usual stuff: drill press, drum sander, Sheelix head on the 735, and a bandsaw. And then I've got this bench that I actually made. I just acquired all the pieces and parts. The top is a lamb beam, I think out of a warehouse in Salem, the guy told me, and I had that cut down. What's the name of that company? Not Central Woodworking. I always want to call it the place in Southeast. Well, I had them cut it down and Creative. That's right. I had them cut it down and sand it for me, but I built that and primarily to use with the harpsichord work, and it's worked out really, really well for me. And then in the bottom of it, I've got various hand planes, mostly Lee Nielsen and Veritas planes. I'm not a collector, so everything down there I use. I think I do have some old Stanley stuff down there from when I first started woodworking. So when I talked about kits, I've got a kit right here. So all of those parts and pieces, except for this stuff, basically this is a harpsichord. Now, what's interesting about this is it was made by Hubbard Harpsichord Company in 1984. I have the original invoice and all the original paperwork, and it's sat in various back rooms and storerooms and woodsheds. And I drove over to Boise and picked it up. He just gave it to me and said, whoever gets here first can have it. So I went and got it. It's been an interesting experience because I do have personal experience with archaeology and history, and it's really hard to bring a box like that home and open the thing up and there are the parts that Frank Hubbard touched and looked at, and and it's almost like I feel like I've gone into a museum and pulled out some artifacts, and now I'm just going to slap them together so I can play them, But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, what would Frank want? He would want me to put it together and make it playable. He doesn't want it sitting in a box in somebody's backyard shed in Boise. He wants people playing it. So that's what we're going to do. Now, I've already started gluing some parts together, but it came, so when you're making instruments, there's a fine line between furniture, especially instruments of this size, between stability and furniture, and tone woods and making an instrument that's resonant. So the kit came with a plywood bottom. And I decided, I actually have a harpsichord making mentor, Owen Daly. He lives in Salem, and he's produced museum quality instruments for 40 years. He said, you know, you're really going to want to replace that plywood with just good old knotty pine. It's 1/2 inch. I used the original bottom. I just used it as a template, which I'll save. And that's in process right now. Because I don't collect hand planes, I actually managed to acquire a compass plane on eBay, and it'll be here Thursday. So this on the pine, I'm going to use the compass plane to finish that up. I'm about 1/8 of an inch outside all the way around, and the way I did that is I just did we nail or did we? Yeah, I just nailed the plywood to the pine, and I just ran a router around it, and I used a trim router. First, I jigsawed it down to within about 1/8 of an inch, and then we just ran a router with a bearing around it, and it still needs cleanup though. We're about 1/16 of an inch off. So once that's done, we can start putting the thing together in earnest. Over here, one thing that I have to do. So the kits are great, but there's still a bunch of work that you have to put into them. So this is a side. Actually, it's the back. And what I'm going to have to do with this, and it is not plywood. I haven't really looked at it, but I suspect it's poplar. It could be maple. I'm not sure. I think it's poplar. But what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to veneer the thing with this walnut veneer that came with the kit. But it's really old and it's really brittle. And I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it work. So what I will probably do is hit crosscut or goby. Am I talking too loud? Can anybody tell me? Okay. I have to hit crosscut or goby. I'm just going to buy a big sheet of their veneer, walnut veneer, and that's going to do a couple things for me. One is I don't have to deal with these 3.5, 4-inch pieces of veneer that I hope end up working, you know. On the other hand, I don't think I can just cut a 6-foot piece and slap it on there. I think I'm going to probably do 1 or 2 foot pieces and you know, glue it on that way. So I use sizing a lot with making these instruments. So I'll probably size both sides. It was really interesting when there's a harpsichord here that you can't see, carcass, and we may bring it up later. It's under the moving blanket, but the soundboards on these things are super thin, 2 to 3 millimeters. So you just join the things together, and then you continue to plane them down in specific places. And this is the resonant part. You know, it's like in some ways, a harpsichord is like a guitar. If you think about it, it's got a back, sides, and then the top is just a spruce or pine soundboard, sometimes cypress or what's that, Port Orford cedar. But you can see that it's very thin. So what you do is you size these. So my sizing ratio is 10 or 11 to 1 water to glue. When you size it, you come out the next day and it's curled up, and it gives you pause. And then you just flip it over and you size the other side and come out the next day, and that tension has brought it back down and returned it. But you know, I like to think that constant tension is still in that top, and it'll make it more lively, I hope. Speaking of sizing, I use, I don't know if anybody's heard of Norland's fish glue. I use fish glue almost exclusively because I find, I called and talked to I can't remember his first name, Mr. Norland, the owner of the company, about fish glue has a bad reputation among harpsichord builders. And I heard stories about how, well, if it gets warm, it'll just fall apart. Or if it gets a little bit wet, it'll fall apart. So I called Norland and I said, before I commit to using your glue, is there any truth to that? And he said, well, to separate the joints, once they're solid, you'd have to put your harpsichord in a pool, swimming pool, for about 24 hours. And he said, if you have your harpsichord in a pool for 24 hours, you got bigger problems than my glue, right? So at that point, I committed to it, and I love the stuff. It's sort of like, I've got some around here. It's kind of that caramel color. I've got it somewhere.
They can't hear me when I talk.
Oh, it's down there behind that tight bond in the. I keep it in barbecue barbecue containers. Looks like that. And really, I think it resembles most like the tight bond hide glue, soluble at room temperature. But what's really interesting about this is for one, it's made from fish bladders only, and its open time is 90 minutes. So I don't know if he's putting a lot of urea in that, or I could smell the clove, which is a antifungal. So I know he's doing that, but I just love the stuff. And I've built that carcass is entirely glued together with fish glue. This keyboard was made with fish glue, and I've got some furniture in the house, throughout the house, made with the stuff, and nothing's fallen apart yet. I buy it because it's protein based. I treat it like I talked to Norland, and he said treat it like it's a protein. So I keep it in the refrigerator. I got a gallon in there, which will probably last me until 2030 something. But the stuff keeps well, it works well, and I really like it. So
Is that used a lot for musical instruments, like guitars and stuff like that?
yeah, actually, the question was, do luthiers use it? And I did talk to one of my luthier pals. Portland has arguably more world-class luthiers than any other city in the country right now. And I talked to one of them who makes world-class, I mean, really tippy-top classical and flamenco style guitars. And he uses Norland's. And he said, well, I've got instruments on 6 continents and none have fallen apart yet.
Can you repeat
So,
the brand? Can you repeat the brand or the name again?
That when it firms up, that it turns almost to kind of a glass. It's really interesting. I like to think that is better for instruments than introducing plastic materials in there, but I'm probably just making that up.
Does it dry clear?
Yeah, it's clear. It's almost kind of a yellowish. The only way I can describe it is it's like a glass. It's really interesting looking. I have on the underside of this, I have examples, but I don't want to fish through that stuff now. So another point I wanted to make is and this is my personal preference, I have no problem using everything from hand tools all the way to a CNC. So come over here. This is Connor. Connor is a buddy's son who's he's a great kid. He's an Eagle Scout, and he's in Running Start. And he just does amazing work here. Talk about him like he's my own kid. But Connor and I work together to create jigs, and he's really good at helping me with design ideas. So what I do is I use everything from hand tools to more traditional, electrified stuff to the CNC. And some of my more experienced harpsichord making, I'm not going to call them my peers, but I guess my colleagues or my friends, they don't really like the sound of that. But you know, I can go to Fusion 360 and I can design something up. And as long as my measurements are accurate, I can cut harpsichord parts that are incredibly precise. A lot of times I'm cutting on the table saw. I've got a custom blade that I had made that has 5mm teeth on the width. And, you know, these parts are small enough, and I am very careful. I clamp everything, and I've got jigs and tools to be safe, but still it makes me quite nervous at times. So what I do, for example, this is a guide. So the way that the harpsichord works is it's got, not all of them are like this, but the ones I'm working on have an upper and lower guides. And if I had not done this on the CNC, I would have had to cut all of these pieces separately, figure out how to get them through a saw blade this size, you know, probably larger blocks, and then cut them down. Or I could go to Fusion 360, take the precise measurements. So the kit came with guides that were made out of maple. And I took those and carefully measured. And so, safety tip, and most of you probably know this, you don't measure relative between the holes, you measure from an end and get your, you know, ask me how I know that. So this is a third version. So what I did is on the Shapeoko, I didn't have enough room to cut this way for the tool head to get in there. And I thought, gosh, I wonder what would happen if I turned it on a 45-degree angle. So I did that, and it turns out the math works. So that's how we cut these. They still obviously need to be cleaned up, but I left them kind of rough so you could see. By the time I'm done cleaning these up, they'll be nice and clean, and the jacks will just slide right through them. So the jack is what plucks the strings, and it looks like you know, it's these sorry guys, it's just these sticks over here. It looks very simple, but it's actually really sophisticated. So the way it works is there's a plectrum, and we use bird quill. So I literally, can you pop that off there? I literally take turkey and Canada goose feathers. You know, when they come in and they take over a park and they eat everything up and they leave, there are a bunch of feathers left behind. So you go get those and process the quill into pieces that you can stick through that become the plectra for the jacks. The mechanism is pretty sophisticated. There's a spring in here, and traditional material is hog bristle, but I use peak. So I have bits that are 0.6 and 0.7 millimeters that are typically used for PCB, drilling PCB holes. We use these on the CNC and on the drill press to drill this stuff out. The groove in there that takes the spring, I cut that by hand. I just got a, what's it called? Veining tool, super sharp veining tool. And I start it with the little Japanese handsaw down the middle, and then I vein it out, and I just need enough to hold that spring in there. And what this does is it's angled at the bottom so that when it goes up, there's enough pressure on the quill that it pushes it into that angled part, and it plucks the string, and there will be a damper over here that slides in, a felt damper. It plucks the string, but when it comes back down, it kind of gently slides around the string and snaps back. And then the damper lands on the string. Otherwise you'd have these just clanging. It would be horrific, really, if you didn't dampen them. So that's part of what I was talking about, where one day we'll be working on keyboard sized pieces where we've joined a bunch of poplar together and then cut the keys up. Then another day we'll be working on the parts for the jacks. And one thing that I did is I have a lot of jigs to make sure that everything's accurate. One that I designed on Fusion 360 is this is just a jack jig that helps us trim them down. So this is a Lee Nielsen 62. It's a down bevel or a Z up bevel. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I don't know.
One of those ways.
Well, up or down. So what I did is I thought about it, and I thought what I'd really like is to be able to put a jack body into something and then take my super sharp blade and just, you know, create my curl right there. And what that allows me to do is it allows me really subtle control as I try to fit these into the guides. You know, it allows me to adjust at fractions of a millimeter, which is perfect. And then in addition to that, on the side, so I can, jacks are tapered. The front is tapered in and the sides are tapered in. And the reason for that is so that they won't get bound up when they're going up and down in the guides. So I just put one in there, and if I want to taper it, it's a pretty manual process. It's not an exact science, but I say, okay, I'm going to start my taper right below and just give it more pressure toward the end and maybe hit the end a couple times. And now I have a very subtle taper in there. And I do that to the other side as well. The jacks are made out of what amount to quarter sawn beech. And the tongues are beech as well. Some builders make the tongues from lime and holly and pear and just different materials. At the end of the day, it's a mechanical part. And some of the, I talk about the Renaissance and first principles. A lot of those companies, especially the kit companies in the 60s, did plastic jacks. All the parts were plastic because it doesn't affect really the tone, but maybe it does. So for the kit, Connor and I are building an entire set of jacks and upper and lower guides. So we're replacing that and the bottom, and then we'll have an instrument that's just beautiful. And if my harebrained scheme about the crosscut veneer sheets, which I've purchased before, if that works, we should have this thing together in 2 to 3 months. I'm hoping, sure be nice by the end of the year, but I've also got a day job, so that takes up more time than I like.
How many jacks in a harpsichord?
So you can see the keyboards are small. The repertoire of the time didn't have the range. They're not 88 keys like a modern piano. That one's 52. But we have on a harpsichord what we call ranks. So you'll have and I don't want to get into this too much, but you have an 8 foot. So you're on any instrument, your 8 foot tone, whether it's an organ pipe or a harpsichord string, that 8 foot tone is like your middle C is 8 foot. And really the A, which is where you gauge your tuning from. But the way the bridges work, so on a guitar, you have a nut and a bridge, and on a harpsichord, you have a nut and a bridge. And what a nut and a bridge does is it limits the space, between those two. That's the playable part of your string. Where it goes down and terminates, it doesn't really matter. Same thing with a guitar. That's why we have frets and we tune the guitar. This is not fretted, but the bridge runs at an angle. So if we look at a bridge, this is a great example of an 8 foot bridge. And the way this would work is the strings are going to
when you say an 8 foot bridge, what's that mean? Is that it's the equivalent of 8 feet long, or
this? Sorry, the string length would be 8 feet between the nut and where it crosses the bridge. Can I mute this for a second?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm getting,
Get the man a beer.
yep. Is that my coffee?
That's fine.
Oh. Okay, okay, we're good. So the 8 foot is that
Yeah, okay, we're good. He's good.
the 8 foot is that sounding length of the string. That's your basic 8 foot, middle C. The way these work is you'll have an 8 foot, you also have a 4 foot. So even though there's very little control, so harpsichord doesn't have pedals. It doesn't have a sustain pedal, doesn't have a softening pedal. In that regard, harpsichord is more like the organ. You push down with your fingy, it plucks a string, and you get what you get. There is some subtlety there with, that's the really good players, you can hear the difference. Me, not so much. But in that regard, the harpsichord is more like an organ than a piano because there's no dynamic control. What else can we talk about?
The 4 foot and the 8 foot at the same time?
Oh, yeah.
So we'll repeat the question. Yes.
So do the 4 foot and 8 foot pluck at the same time? Yes and no. So you actually, so the guide, the upper guide sits this way in relation to the player. You have a lever where you can move. So you'll have an 8 foot and a 4 foot guide. And you can grab a lever and you can move it just a little bit. And what that does is it pulls the plectra it's part of what's called voicing, are just barely under the string. Well, when they pull it, it pulls all the plectra away from the strings. They still go up and down. The jacks go up and down and play, but they don't pluck the strings. So you can have any combination of 4 foot alone, 8 foot alone, or both together. And then there are other, it gets kind of crazy. There are other mute stops, and sometimes there are 3 ranks, and then there are instruments that have 2 keyboards, which are really complex. But what you have to think about is as you're determining the height of your jacks, your 8 foot and your 4 foot run this way along the key. So you really have to attend to the height of the back one, which is going to be different than the height of the front one. So you want them to pluck roughly at the same time, not necessarily exactly at the same time, but roughly. And if you make them the same height, the back one's going to go before the front one. So that's just one example of kind of the subtleties that go into this that people might not think about so much when you're making an instrument like this. The other thing is, you'll notice that the keys, typically the sharps are topped with bone, and makers today use camel bone and cow and buffalo, and some even use human. No, that's not true. I'm just making that up. I decided I had this harebrained scheme of I was gonna veneer with quarter sawn oak. This is why I know about those sheets, the crosscut, because I went and got one of those, and then I got my own red oak and quarter sawed it myself and made the tops with that. Probably not the best decision. So at some point I'll either remake these keys or I'll try to strip these off. Unfortunately, they're on with New Orleans fish glue, but it is removable. I did a lot of testing on it when I initially got it, but I'll probably end up replacing these keys, which is a fairly simple matter. It's not, none of this, it's all just wood, right? We're just cutting wood. It's not rocket science. But the interesting thing about the harpsichord is you've got the dark naturals and the lighter colored sharps, where on this, somewhere, sorry. The kit for this, so the instrument over there is a copy of a 1640 Flemish single manual instrument. That's much different than the kit instrument, which is a copy of a 1765. How are we doing? 1765, that was built actually in England. Oh, upside down. Yeah. Did you do that? Thanks, man. Yeah, I don't like to say this in front of him, but Connor's a great kid. He's very helpful, and he, what I like about him is the dude's fearless. I mean, when he comes over and we just, I always have things, I try to have things structured and planned out and say, I'd like to get these 3 things done. And then he gets 6 things done and everything's fantastic. So you'll notice on this one, what's interesting about this, and it brings up another point, is this was made by a third-party manufacturer. All they did back at that time. So this instrument this kit was made in 1984. And there was a company that just made all of their keyboards for them. So these are the sharps, which need to be glued on. Thank you, sir. Everybody can listen to me gulp. That's fantastic. This is, oh no, it escapes me. I want to call it, oh, I can't remember what it is. I'll remember as I'm talking. These, I'm pretty sure, ebony. I haven't even looked at them yet, but given the time at which the kit was put together, they're either ebony or they're going to be dyed walnut or something. What is that wood? I'll think of it, but it's super hard. It's really hard wood. What you want with the keys is you want to make them as a single piece. You want to put your veneers on, so these key tops, and then you want to plane across all of them before you slice them up. And then they just did the finish work. On this one, you can tell that they had a router jig set up with a small roundover bit. They probably just ran them in all day long. They had, somebody there to do that all day long. Yeah, so that brings up the point that the original builders in the 17th and 18th century would actually farm out a lot of their work. So not necessarily the keys, but the case and even the jacks, they would farm that out to cabinet makers. And we can tell because the jacks, back then they looked like offcuts from wood that a cabinet maker would have left over. And it's really interesting to go back and look at the quality of that work. It's pretty rough because, again, these are just mechanical parts. So the jacks, I'm constantly shocked. We have this insistence today because of manufacturing processes and CNC machines that everything needs to be pristine and perfect. And back then, I think they were just worried that it worked, and if they did work, then they just move on. So that's the keyboard for the kit. Super easy. Making a keyboard is always fun, but I'm okay using the keyboard that comes with it. The other thing I wanted to show, so the kit came with a book. It's just an instructional notebook, and he steps you through. There aren't very many pictures. It's not like Ernie Miller's book. Ernie's got photos and videos in there of how to do this stuff. Basically, it's a textbook and an instruction manual. It's like IKEA on steroids, right? And then you've got some planned stuff. But what they did is they numbered all of the parts. So at least you can look at this and kind of figure out where stuff goes. And then if you're going to make one from scratch, this is what a harpsichord plan looks like. You'll get something like this. Yeah, let's flip it that away. I mean, you get the idea. I don't want to open it. Yeah, we can open it. That's fine. So basically, if you don't have Ernie Miller, and if you don't have a kit, you find an instrument you want to make, and this just happens to be a spinet instrument like the kit. It's very much like it. They're called an English bent side because A, they're made in England, and B, they've got this curved bent side in the front. Not all of them are like that. Some of them just have the straight straight side. So it's very, very English, very 18th century, and very potentially confusing. But when you look at it, and after you make a couple, you get used to the parts, and it's like, oh, okay, really all I need is the measurement. I need the spacing for the register holes and stuff like that. So it's not as bad as it looks.
Are those full-size plans?
This is a plan. This is plan view. Yeah, it's.
But is it full size or scaled?
Mostly. Some of it is looking from the side, and I'm not sure. I actually have not looked a lot at this plan. I just got it a couple weeks ago, and kind of set it aside because I want to get this kit together. But you can see that in the harpsichord world, it can be difficult because there are things like these, the hinges and latches and locks and stuff. That stuff's not plentiful nowadays. And there are a couple supply houses. There's a couple in the United States, and there's a couple good ones in Europe, which, the stuff is kind of expensive because they don't make a lot of them. Some of it's, all of it, I guess, is handmade. And the thing about having a CNC is I could look at that and go, oh, I can cut brass. I could cut that on a CNC. But the trouble with having a CNC, it's like when all you have is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And the temptation, when I've had the CNC about maybe 4 years. And the first 6 months, you really just, everything needs to be done on that. And then once you realize that it's taken 3 times longer between design and cutting, and something doesn't work, and you realize that there are limits to it, and you go buy the stuff from the supply houses. So now that I mentioned the CNC, I also use a 3D printer for jigs. And an example of that is a jig that Connor and I worked on to punch. So the little tongues in the jacks, we have to punch a hole in those. So what we did is we took a little mini, like 7mm screwdriver, and we ground it down into a blade. And I 3D printed an insert. So my mortising tool is not ruined. There's a 3D printed cylinder inside there holding the screwdriver. And then we designed and printed the piece, the white and black pieces. And those hold about a 24, 28mm tongue. The white one is 10-degree angle, and the black one is 5-degree. The 5-degree we're going to use for the tongues for, I showed them a tongue inside, but they're just tiny. They're maybe 5 millimeters wide, 2.5 millimeters thick. The reason it's got 2 little fingers over it is because once you punch that blade through, the wood just grips it. And when you pull up, you can't get the darn thing off. You end up breaking the blades because they're so thin. So we just put 2 fingers on there and make sure it's secured, and they just pop right off. And he can do 50 in what? And easily in an hour. And I think he did one day, he did 100 in the time he was here. So, gosh, there's a lot more, but I'm not sure I want to keep going on because it's at some point. So the last jig I'll show you is the one on the bench here, and it just looks crazy, and it kind of is. No 3D printing was involved, but the CNC was involved. So what I did is I had the good old Gobi free box. I don't know if you guys have vultured that like I have a couple times, but I just used wood that I had in a scrap pile. I picked this up because I can set my angle. And what we do is we take a jack body and we'll throw it in here. I have them marked out. We'll throw it in there, and then I'll put one of my 0.7 millimeter, after they're cut, there's a groove in there typically. I'll put one of my 0.7 millimeter drill bits in and we'll drill through at that angle for the spring. And then we'll take on the drill press and we'll drill from this side. So the peak fiber or whatever you want to call it, filament goes through, wraps around and then comes out. And that's a spring that pushes the jack tongue back into place. This is pretty much now, and this is a 3D printer rail parts that I just got off of, I don't know where I got it, off of Amazon or something. And I dedicated a Dremel to it. And now it took months to come up with these crazy ideas. But now Connor and I can do a jack set in a week, where before it was a lot of pain and suffering. You can buy jacks, but they're between $5 and $7 each. So if you're looking at 2 ranks of 52, that's 725, 730 bucks. And, you know, I'm the cheapest guy alive, so it's not going to happen. Yeah, that's about it. I don't think we want to pull the carcass out. It's nice, but it would be a production. But that's about it. There's a lot more, but I know. Open the fire hose. I don't want to go on and on, but it's like anything. It's woodworking, and you just attend to some of the finer aspects, and you end up with a nice instrument when you're done. So
Can you guys hear us if we ask questions?
yes.
Okay, so we've had a couple of questions that I tried to throw in there earlier, but we didn't get. So the question about wood parts, and don't they wear out on a harp? How does that work?
I just saw, I have many friends, you know, good old social media, love it and hate it, but I have maker friends all over the world now. And some of the guys in Europe, they work on instruments that are 200 to 300 to 400 years old. I just saw some jacks that were 230 years old with the original hog bristle in them that were still working.
So it's the bristle that's doing the plucking, not the wood.
No, the plectra wear out. So when you have problems with the harpsichord, typically it's centered on the jacks. I had a woman actually call me this morning. She was referred by one of my colleagues up in Seattle. She's here in Vancouver and she bought an instrument. There's a place called the Harpsicord Clearinghouse, believe it or not. And she bought an instrument and the jacks, she said, are in a state of disrepair. And what that means to me is probably most of the plectra were probably made from Darin plastic. And over time, that flexing, you know what that does to metal and plastic, it'll make it brittle and then they'll just snap off. So yeah, the plectra, the actual moving parts, and then the strings, of course, it's real interesting. You can string an instrument in brass, but you can only do that so far. The upper registers have to be iron because of the tension. And you can, you know, once you get an ear for it, you can hear that transition as somebody's playing up the keyboard.
So when you were trying to remember the type of wood on those keys, someone suggested boxwood.
Boxwood. Yep.
Okay, Jacob wins the prize.
Very good. Super hard wood.
And then others are asking, are you supplying parts to people?
You know, I've had people request that, and I'm not retired. I still work, and this is not something. I don't know how to put this. There aren't many full-time builders. A lot of them have significant others that work, or they come from money, or there's always some story. But there are 2 guys in the United States, one on the East Coast and one on the West here. This guy named Norm Purdy in Eugene, all he does is make jacks. And he has a shop in Eugene, and he's got stations, kind of like my silly jig over there. Every station has a singular purpose. And he charges $5 a jack, and his jacks are exquisite. When you get a jack from Norm Purdy, you have the best, arguably, in the world. But I'm still the cheapest guy in the world.
So how long did the jack Oh,
What's
sorry.
the footprint of a finished instrument? How big are we talking about?
Yeah, it's not very big. The actual footprint, it's Rucker's single manual is just over 5 feet by about 3 feet wide. The seat's going to take up a little space, so you're probably talking 7 or 8 feet, depending on the seat of who's sitting on the seat. You know what I mean? But not very much space. Now, what's interesting is the spinet kit that I'm making does not go, like distally away from the player. It's twisted on its side, so the strings run back and forth. So a lot of people who are in apartments and smaller places like those because they can put them into a corner and save that space. But there's still, no matter how you cut it, it's 6 feet this way and 3 feet that way, or 4 feet.
And then people were asking, prior to CNC and all the other stuff that you're using today, how long did it take, and were they making them hundreds of years ago?
Like that.
Okay.
So they really did farm out the work to cabinet makers. And I know of builders, I know of a couple guys in Europe that have people on staff and all they do is make cases, or they buy their jacks or their keyboards made by another company. So it all depends. If you're doing everything from scratch, like my friend Owen in Salem, because he's a master, he can have an instrument up in 3 or 4 months. And then it takes some time. Once you string it, it takes some time for it to settle in and all the tensions to resolve out. And so if you order from Owen, he has a waiting list that's about 2 years long. And then B, you're looking at a good 6 months by the time he's happy to let it go out the door. And as Owen says, it's not a mistake till it leaves the shop. So he's very careful about that sort of thing. But the thing about harpsichords is they're very, very finicky. You need to attend to humidity, temperature, make sure they're out of the sun. Think about an acoustic guitar. You don't want to leave it sitting in the sun, and you don't want it expanding and contracting with heat and cold too much. Often what you'll see is these instruments, are we done?
I just switched it to.
These instruments at universities are in practice rooms, and people have to sign for that time. They key them in and out, no drinks, no food, no nothing, because I've seen some spills that were pretty horrific, and nothing like a coffee on a soundboard to ruin your day, But yeah, and then I went to I was traveling and I went to a guy's place in Oakland, and his house was completely consumed by harpsichords by different makers of different time periods. He had forte pianos. I think he had 12 or 13 harpsichords in that house.
Wow.
Yeah, he was married and the tensions were high. Put it that way. Yeah.
So how often do you need to tune a harpsichord?
Depending on humidity and temperature. So, if it's sitting often they sit in like a cold church where the temperatures go down and then they put them up, and any kind of wood is going to expand and contract. And especially since we're not using stable woods like plywoods, you got a lot of wood movement. And I guess my short answer is it depends on temperature and humidity. It could be every day. If you can get it into a stable environment, it could be twice a year. And then if you don't have an ear for it, it could be every couple years.
Someone mentioned that a harpsichord was featured in the Oregon Symphony a few weeks ago.
Oh, nice. I know that Portland Baroque Orchestra, of course, because of that time period, they use harpsichords pretty extensively. And the builder, he's retired now. His name was Byron Wills. You may have read about him. He's in the paper from time to time. His instruments. So what guys will do is they'll make instruments and they'll hold on to them, and then when the symphony needs them, they'll rent them from them for the day or for the week. And Byron does that now. I see his instruments at provide. I always know his instruments when I see them. So yeah,
Do you
that's
play?
fantastic.
Do you play yourself?
Yeah, that's what got me into this mess. I've been playing keyboards since I was about eight years old, and then right out of high school, my first tour through college, I went to Lewis and Clark. I was an organ performance, organ and harpsichord major. Played in that beautiful round chapel up there for a lot of years. Spent a lot of hours, and that's what prompted me when I was doing some guitar work. I thought, you know, I bet I can build a harpsichord. It can't be that hard, right? How hard can it be?
Darren, I got to tell you, your presentation was fascinating.
Okay, thank you.
That was great.
We
I
can
hope
only
you
wait for
enjoyed
the
it.
second version when you show us the piece finished. You can show us around inside under the cover and then demonstrate.
Yeah, play a tune
Okay.
for us.
Okay, deal.
All right.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Extremely fascinating.
Ooh.
Well, I guess that's a wrap then. Certainly appreciate all that went into putting that together.
I agree.
I think it over. Here, I'll let you. Which way? Oh, this folds.
Steve, you're
Yeah.
you're the main guy right now. If you want to wrap it up.
Okay, well, thanks for, I think we had, I think over 40 people at one point there. It was impressive show up. I want to remind everybody that
I broke a piece
this year
there.
we will not have
Oh,
a
oops.
December meeting or function. We're looking forward in January or February to having somewhat of a party, not a dinner, but probably a pizza get together, and to really focus on showing everybody what
So one thing we're going to do.
program groups are up to. So that's it for now. Thank you for electing a new board, because that means I get to retire from being president.
Yeah, but you don't get to go away.
Mr. Ed here will take over the leadership position.
Oh, really?
But we're still having a monthly meeting in December, aren't we?
I can't.
No,
get
I think not.
Okay. All right, because I have a presenter for December, but I can move her to January.
That probably would be, so we got to talk about it offline.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's 40-some people there.
Cool.
Oh, wow, nobody left.
There's nothing worse than.
Guys, we're going to mute you there in the shop.
We don't want you to say anything you didn't realize was being broadcast.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm going to stop the recording now too. So
So at any rate, the official meeting is done.